Thanks very much. Please excuse the slightly strange background behind me. I'm in a hotel in Adelaide, having just come over to see the core from our most recent IOCG hole, which I'll talk to about today and probably be one of the major focuses. So Coda Minerals, we listed in October last year. So as Tim said, we haven't been listed a year yet. And we really listed with what I call very strong foundations. Although we only listed in October, we were a public unlisted company and demerged from a previous entity. So the core team, myself, our head geologist, the board, has really been with this project for a long time. So a lot of what you see, the very fast progress since listing, has really been the combination of an enormous amount of work and understanding that has gone into this project over about the last 3 years. The existing indicated resources, MG14 and Windabout, and the exploration target, Emmy Bluff, are one of two forms of mineralization that occur on this tenure. This is what we call a Zambian-style copper cobalt mineralization, generally occurring sort of flat-lying strata-bound mineralization. The existing resources are in JORC indicated status, and that's given us a very good foundation to work from. There's about 380,000 tons of contained copper equivalent in JORC indicated resources. That's what I would call a good start. It's really not something that we felt was enough to turn the dial, and we started to look at the exploration potential on the tenure a while ago. As we did that, we sort of looked at Emmy Bluff, which was an area that had been found, an area of sort of mineralization about 400 meters down that had been found when looking for IOCGs in the basement. And this story starts to become really exciting when we start to look at the hole that we drilled and released on the 9th of June, which really demonstrated 200 meters of quite intense IOCG style alteration, what appears to be about 50 meters of sulfide copper mineralization at depth. So, great foundation with that MG14 and Windabout resource. Emmy Bluff, which is shaping up to be a resource this year, and we expect to deliver a maiden resource towards the end of the year. And then this most recent hole, which really, demonstrates what is potentially beneath Emmy Bluff in terms of the IOCG, which is the iron oxide copper gold mineralization, for which this area is so famous. The area, we're just 40 kilometers from Carapatina, 16 kilometers from Oak Dam West, and then Prominent Hill and Olympic Dam to the north. So this is the right area to be looking for IOCGs. And certainly with this most recent hole, there's been a huge amount of share price uplift, huge amount of excitement. As I say, I've just come from looking at the core this morning. We've announced that the assays will be out within 3 to 5 weeks from that announcement. So about 3 weeks from now. So that's very exciting. Near-term growth really coming from both the Emmy Bluff exploration target for the Zambian style, and then additional drilling at the IOCG hole. Next slide, please. So it's very tightly held. 60% of the shares are held by the top 20. We've just done a capital raise. So the shares, they'll be issued on Monday, but even after the capital raise, we'll have less than 100 million shares on issue. Very, very tightly held. No debt. Market capitalization approximately $150 million today. And the cash and equivalents, 9.9 as the last quarterly. But as of today, the money's being transferred and we'll have $21.5 million in the bank, which is a very strong place to be when you're out hunting for IOCGs in elephant country. Next slide, please. The board, look, why is this important? Some juniors, when they do have a measure of exploration success, can, really, the next steps can be challenging for inexperienced boards. This is a very experienced board. What really matters here, Paul Hallam on the board of Sandfire, former executive at FMG, Robin Marshall, fresh from delivering the Goldfields Gruyere project as the chairman of the steering committee. Colin Moorhead took PD Medeka into a multi-billion-dollar company, has form for doing this, taking juniors through to major companies, and our most senior geoscientist, and Keith Jones, former chairman of Deloitte Australia. it's a very strong board and a board befitting of a much larger company. And that is very helpful as we go through what is quite rapid growth at the moment. Next slide, please. I won't dwell on copper. I think the first presentation did this far better than I can, but I think it's worth noting that there are a very small number of copper producers on the ASX, and an even smaller number of credible near-term and medium-term sort of developers behind them. And I think this is very important when looking for exposure to copper. Coda is also one of the very few nickel-independent sources of cobalt in Australia, in the world, really. And this is very exciting. Outside of the DRC, very few sources of cobalt. And again, that bodes very well for us. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So again, the value proposition, as I mentioned at the start, really based on that strong foundation of indicated resources with a resource at Emmy Bluff expected to be delivered this year. And again, we expect that based on the exploration targets to be a very good peer comparable resource at Emmy Bluff. The Emmy Bluff Deeps IOCG hole has been a source of enormous excitement. There is huge potential here, and it is just one hole, but it's a very good hole. Next slide, please. So what did we find at the Emmy Bluff IOCG deep hole? Well, really, there are two very strong targets on the tenure. And Emmy Bluff Deeps was the first cab off the rank in terms of drilling on what is an area where we've got a very high gravity anomaly, but a low magnetic anomaly. And Elaine is the second one. And one of the things that's really interesting here is the source of the copper in the shallow Zambian style deposits has long been considered to be potentially coming up from the basement. And with the Emmy Bluff Deeps hole, what we've really done is hit that massive alteration and the mineralized sort of copper area of sulfides. And that's sort of really showing where that copper is most likely to be coming from for the more shallow deposits. And again, Elaine, which sits just above MG14 and Windabout, the indicated resources, another huge question which we need to go and answer. Next slide, please. So on this slide, what you can see here is the sort of coincident magnetic and gravity anomaly just in the top right of the slide. And you can see that historical drilling had either drilled right on the coincident anomaly or reasonably well off of that anomaly. And our focus, our sort of geological hypothesis, is really looking, based on what we were seeing, and especially MGD 55, which is approximately 500 meters from the hole 18, which we've just released. Now, MGD 55, primarily chalcopyrite, relatively low-grade mineralization, and as you come off of that into hole 18, we're seeing a fundamentally different sort of picture coming off from this core. Next slide, please. So what we're seeing really as you come 550 meters to the west is a much thicker zone of mineralization, logged steely hematite in the Wandiyara siltstone, and then coming into several zones which are visually very clearly full of sulfides. Obviously, with the assays pending, we still have a lot of work to do, but it's a very exciting time for us. Next slide, please. So really focusing in on those zones. So what we found is we came out of about 160 meters of very intensely altered, hematite cap, coming into an upper zone of disseminated blebby chalcocite and bornite in massive hematite. We've had an XRF on this. We've got, confirmed elevated levels of copper, also molybdenum and cobalt. What has been really interesting is the readings on the XRF for pathfinder elements, particularly lanthanum and cerium, in the sort of 100 meters or so of very strongly cooked up, altered material above this. And we then sort of come below that into the chalcocite bornite zone, then into a sort of narrower zone that's more sort of trace sulfides, and then sort of really visible areas that you can see on this slide, very much dominated by chalcopyrite, sort of moderate to intense sulfide sort of mineral abundance in that, with very elevated molybdenum and cobalt levels, and then accessory bornite. And bornite in particular in the IOCG is something that you really want to see and is often correlated with higher grades. And then coming down to a low zones, again, very, very visible bornite. You can see that peacocking in the core as the bornite's oxidized, and that's sort of, again, a very exciting sign. This is fundamentally different to what we've seen in other holes in the area, where there's generally elevated levels of chalcopyrite, not much else visible, and much less evidence of sort of major mineralizing systems coming through the area. So with that, I'll probably pause for questions. I've talked earlier on, and there are slides behind this that are available on ASX, in terms of the existing resources and the exploration target at Emmy Bluff, which we expect to deliver this year, but really a very, very exciting period for us. We have a lot of work to do. We have the drill rigs turning as we speak, and we have plenty of cash to go and make that happen. And it's going to be a very, very exciting and challenging 3 months ahead. You could probably power a small city off the nervous energy in the office right now, but we really are getting on with it. It's one hole, and we know what we need to do, and we're going to go and do it. So, we look forward to releasing more information as we move on.
Thanks, Chris. Can you give us a little bit more colour? We've got quite a few questions here. Can you give us a little bit more colour on the idea, the grade of the resource that you've found, and the depth of drilling you may have to go to?
Yeah, look, I think if I had $1 for every time I've been asked to speculate on the grade, I could probably fund a large part of this drill program myself personally. The reality is that what we're seeing is a fundamentally different sort of mineralization coming out of this. We've announced off visuals. The assays are going to be the proof of the pudding here. I will say that the final grade of the assays, these things tend to grade 1% to 2%. You often do get higher grade bornite zones and bornite cores. Carapatina, from memory, is about a 0.8% resource, 1.1% reserve. So, I have absolutely no more information really than the market does in terms of what that grade is likely to be. I think that 1% to 2% is a very exciting place for an IOCG discovery. But again, it's one hole. What is beyond this? We have to go and control how laterally extensive this goes, what the grade of this hole is, but also what the grades of the next holes are. And again, how thick, is this the edge of a much thicker zone that really comes and goes down into a source of copper? Or is this something which is more laterally extensive but flat lying? And these are questions that we just have to answer with the next round of drilling.
And just a question here, you have lots of targets, kind of how do you prioritize drilling to get the best medium-term value?
Look, that's a very, very good question. And the reality is that we are focused on delivering a resource at Emmy Bluff, which is the sediment-hosted Zambian-style copper cobalt deposit that sits above Emmy Bluff Deeps. We have drill rigs on that. Our plans have not changed. We are still utterly committed to delivering that resource. And that resource we expect to deliver towards the sort of early part of Q4. We're saying second half, and really we remain on track for that. In terms of the targets around Emmy Bluff Deeps, look, you've got to go, in my opinion, with an inside-out approach. We've hit a zone of very strongly altered rock. We need to step out cautiously and conservatively from this and really work through that geophysical anomaly. And that's what we're going to do. We have cleared pads, environmental and heritage clearance, so we can go and get that done as well. Everything is in place. We have drill rigs, one RC and one diamond at Emmy Bluff. The RC will then move on to do the regional exploration, which is also in these slides. And we expect to have 2 diamond rigs full-time on Emmy Bluff Deeps. So you can imagine the job that our exploration manager's got on his hands right now. The whole team is really working harder and smarter.
I mean, there's a lot of money coming into this sector. Is it a mad bull market out there?
Look, we've got a market cap of about 150 million. And if you look at some of our peers, peer comparisons are dangerous in some ways, because you have different, many different aspects to that. But if you sort of look at where companies that can demonstrate that they have a real solid foundational resource, which I believe Emmy Bluff combined with MG Fortune and Windabout are, then you can see that re-rate. I would have expected this market cap to really result from, getting a re-rate from the Emmy Bluff resource that it is without the IOCG holds. We're still committed to that work. So this isn't one hole and nothing else. This is one hole off the back of very, very strong foundations, for a company that really understands this tenure and has been committed to exploration here for a long time, with other targets as well. That gives me a lot of comfort as a CEO. As I say, it's a bull market. We believe in copper, and we believe we've got really good assets, both in terms of near-term resources, existing resources, and that exploration as well.
And we moved on quickly from the timeline slide. Can you give us a little bit more color on that?
Yeah, look, so again, we expect to deliver a resource at Emmy Bluff the second half of this year. We also have an ambitious exploration program, which is primarily RC, so it's a different type of drill rig, so it won't distract from either the resource at Emmy Bluff or the exploration work at the IOCG. We're currently 2/3 of the way into a wedge hole off of this existing hole that we've announced. Second rig should arrive next week. If not, then it'll be early the week after, and that'll start going with holes from surface. Expect the assays in approximately 3 to 4 weeks from now. The assays are important, but they're not the be-all and end-all. What really matters is what's in these next drill holes. Roughly it takes about a month to drill each one of these deep holes. We'll have 2 rigs going, and our strategy will be to drill 2 wedge holes off each deep hole, assuming that the wedge holes are giving us what we need and the separation we want. So I've sort of answered your question. Over the next 3 months, there's going to be an awful lot of activity and news flow, and expect that to keep coming. And then with the resource coming towards the end of the year.